Before we turn to citizens' comments, and I know we have quite a few, we did have Commissioner Wiseman's ordinance that was proposed. And Commissioner Wiseman, you indicated that to yourself an expert in the area of civil rights, and that if I had any questions that you'd be glad to answer them for me. And before people have an opportunity to speak, I have a few questions that I would like to ask you. In reading the newspapers, there has been an indication that the ordinance that has been proposed for the city of Dayton is somehow similar to or identical to ordinances that have been proposed in other cities. And I've not had an opportunity to review all of the ones that you cited, but I did have an opportunity to review some of them. And since you've cited them, I'm assuming that you did also. And I'd like to ask you why some provisions were not included in your ordinance. In the ordinance in Toledo, any religious organization or institution whose membership or service is limited to persons of particular religious faith is not subject to the provisions of the ordinance. Any private organization having a purely social or fraternal purpose is not subject to the provisions. Any type of employment where religion, religious creed, or nationality would usually normally be considered an essential qualification of employment is not subject to the provisions. And employers who have less than 12 people are not subject to the ordinance. Similarly, in Louisville, there's a religious exception. In your ordinance, there is not a religious exception. And in fact, when there's a provision in your ordinance that says that there may be an exception for employees where issues of sexual orientation or sexual behavior might have an impact on qualification, you did not include sexual orientation as any basis that an employer might make that decision. Can you tell me why you didn't exclude churches?
Well, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate the question that you have posed, and but I question whether the question you pose is sought for the legitimate reason of wanting to craft the best possible non-discrimination ordinance for the city of Dayton that includes protections for lesbians and gay men, or whether your comments are simply designed to create roadblocks and obstacles to passing such legislation here in the city of Dayton. So before I answer that question, I'd like to ask a question of you, which is, do you support including gays and lesbians in Dayton's non-discrimination ordinance?
No. No. I do not support including them because I don't think that there's a need to. We're not talking about the issues of whether or not we have tolerance or whether or not we have respect for one another or what's going on in other people's lives. I don't believe that there's a need to include them. When you look at, and I'll answer your question, which you didn't answer mine, which it might be an issue that even the rest of the commission isn't even aware of, my question. But if you look at the demographics on the issue of sexual orientation, there isn't any evidence that shows that there is a need for protection on the basis of homosexuality as a special protected class in the area of employment. If you look at national statistics, if you're going to look for any impacts of discrimination, you're going to look at it on the economic side. Well, statistics will show you that on average, the average per capita annual incomes of the gay community is $36,800 versus $12,286 for the nation. Household income, $55,430 versus $32,144. Likely to hold an advanced degree, 60% versus 18% for everybody else. More likely to be a professional or management position, the ones that are making these decisions, 49% versus 16%. Now, this is from the Family Research Council. And so you'd say, you know, what is this? Is this just some conservative organization that would actually say that the group that is seeking protection is one of the most affluent and educated? So I went and picked up this month's genre magazine. This is a magazine of the gay community. And in this magazine, there's advertised the 7th International Gay and Lesbian 2000 Business Entertainment Festival. And it says, a day of nightlife. Join us for the bash of the century. Over 18,000 attendees from 16 countries and 45 states. Live entertainment that never stops. Reach nearly 20,000 of the most highly educated, affluent, lavishly spending customers in the world, entertainment-oriented, brand-loyal, and widely traveled. Doesn't sound to me like the type of people that I'm used to thinking of as being discriminated against. So in any event, back to my question, and I don't even know if my fellow commissioner is aware of, that your ordinance would basically invalidate almost every religion's basically right to make a decision based on sexual behavior with respect to the employment of the major spiritual leader of their church.
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to clarify your misrepresentations about the ordinance. And then, since there's nothing that I could say that would change your opinion one way or the other as to the merits of this ordinance, I don't intend to respond to any further questions that you're going to pose about it. Although I certainly will respond where appropriate so that the ordinance can be understood accurately. With respect to what this ordinance does, there are a number of cities in the state of Ohio that prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. Those communities include Columbus, Ohio, Cleveland, Cleveland Heights, Athens, Toledo, Yellow Springs, and so on. The amendments that I have proposed have left the City of Dayton's non-discrimination ordinance as it was written, as it has been crafted in 1962 and amended throughout the years. All that I have done is include the definitions of source of income and sexual orientation, and I have defined place of birth and inserted them into the prohibitions that have existed in the city for a long, long time. There are exceptions within the current ordinance that apply to religious organizations.
No, there are not. Not in the area of employment. There are not.
That is true, and that we simply have a philosophical
Well, at
difference.
least you've said it's true.
Mr. Mayor, could you please not interrupt me?
At least you've said it's true.
Could you please not interrupt me? Because if you can't carry on a civil debate without interrupting somebody, Mr. Mayor, then quite frankly, you don't deserve to preside at this meeting.
I would never propose an ordinance. First off, I would never propose an ordinance that is unconstitutional and is going to have an impact on other people's religious freedoms. So that's why I think it's okay to occupy this chair.
I suggest that we move on to listening to the public comment portion of this meeting. And I would ask my peers to agree with me and join me in asking that we call forward citizens for public comment now, rather than engage in dialogue between ourselves. Because that's not the issue, Mr. Mayor. The issue here is the merit of the amendments that have been raised. I and my colleagues support those amendments. We have people who want to give us their viewpoints about them. I suggest that we move on. This isn't about you, as incredible as that may seem to you. This is about justice, and it's about providing justice to every person in this community. And I think that's what the work is that we're here to do, and that's what we ought to do right now.
Your Honor, I would move that we move the citizens' comment in the program.
Well, at
Second.
this point, I have the floor, and we can't take a vote that stops me from having the floor. And I have one other question that's very important.
Well, then
And I don't think the two of you were aware that this ordinance did not apply to churches. And the second thing that they may not be aware of, which is important, that I want people to know before they take that podium, are the other work exceptions that you did not include, are that in other areas, they also provided issues concerning gender identity, that it not include issues of preventing an employer from imposing gender-specific dress in any workplace. And that's one that you also did not specifically include in your ordinance, even though you reviewed the others. And that's important. Now I'm done.
Your Honor, I move that we move to the citizen comment of our calendar.
I would second that.
Mr. Williams, you please call the first citizen.
Yes, Your Honor. Before I call the first person, I'd like to mention that there's a 3-minute time limit when you come up with